Hi, welcome back to my video. I'm Cultured Almond Milk. Let's get into what I read this month. Nightcrawling is a book about an almost adult woman who gets into the business that she was not really planning to get into. Personally, I think it's best if you get into this book without really knowing much except what it is on the back of the book. The book itself was full of tragic yet poignant aspects of life. And the brother of the protagonist is so infuriating. I hated him so much. I kind of get where he is coming from, but at the same time, the way he neglects his sister is infuriating. And how the family dynamic fans out is interesting because you can see the both side of this family, right? The sister and the brother, and you can see where they're coming from. And because you're seeing through the perspective of a sister, you cannot really feel how the brother actually feels. You just feel like, what are you doing, brother? She is your little sister. I want to recommend checking trigger warnings before reading this book because it can be very triggering with some themes. This book gives a lot of nuance to police brutality, power dynamic, and poverty, and many more. I'm really glad I read this book. It is not the 5-star read for me, but I will remember this book for a very long time. Next, I read Immortal Longings, and I really like this book because it is a fantasy book about the body snatching and very congested city. It is developed, but at the same time, there's so much poverty. Although the pacing at the beginning is a bit slow, so you have to kind of wait it out. It is very similar to the concept of the Hunger Game, but I agree with other reviews saying that the game itself is not really the center of the story. It's more about the main character willing to kill the king and win the game to change the whole regime. And while pursuing that goal, there is a romance and there is a lot of murders, and the ending of the book was so good, so I had to read the second book. But I hated the second book because while I was so excited to read about what is going to happen after that crazy ending, it was only explained as a random happening. I'm not sure how it would have panned out in the ending of the second book, but I just couldn't force myself to read through all of that because there was no development and no revelation. It was just more and more going through the plot just for the sake of going through the plot. The next book I read was very cozy, which is The Teller of Small Fortunes. It is such a warm book. I think this book deserves a hype if it ever gets it. I'm not sure if it's already getting hype because it should. This fortune teller always tries to tell small fortunes because she doesn't want to cause any trouble while being an immigrant in this new country. During her traveling, she meets these two people who is looking for a lost daughter and also a baker, and they start traveling together. The story is very warm and a lot of conflicts get resolved very easily, so it's really not stressful to read this book at all. There's one point when there is a climax, like a final big conflict, that I felt like, what are you doing? Because I was so worried about this found family and I wanted them to be happy. Fortunately, because this is a cozy fantasy book, everything will go well, so you don't have to worry about that. If you have been reading a lot of heavy books and you want some palate cleansers, it's good. Another fantasy book I read is How to Summon a Fairy Godmother. This book is really funny. The protagonist is a stepsister of Cinderella in a way. She is so witty and can talk when she doesn't like it. The stepsister of Cinderella tries to get out of this upcoming forced marriage by summoning a fairy godmother, just like Cinderella did. Unfortunately, the things doesn't go out as she planned, so now she has to do this 3 tasks as the fairy godmother asks. The pacing of the story felt a little bit slow while she is doing these 3 tasks, but it is a very cozy one. Also, the ending and the message that ending gives were very interesting. I didn't expect that it would go like that, so when that happened, I was very surprised. And as a bonus point, the cover is very pretty. I think this one could have been fine as a standalone book, but it is a series, and I'm probably going to read the second one when it comes out. The Dead Romantic was surprisingly good. I didn't really think that I will really love this book, but the Mortician and Funeral House really grabbed me. The main character is a ghostwriter for the very famous romance author, and she has to go back to her little hometown because her dad, who is a mortician, passed away. To make things worse, a new editor who is a very hot guy but a very stern person wants to get the new romance novel as soon as possible. Now she has to deal with so many things, and somehow more things happen. I could relate a lot with the main character Florence. I also felt like I was receiving a hug from this book, because while Florence feels that she is inadequate, throughout this journey she gets a lot of love and support from her family members and her love interest. I always feel fascinated by how mortality and death are conveyed differently with each book, so I had a great fun time while reading this book. I skipped some spicy scenes and I was more focused on Florence's mental growth and development. If you're also fascinated by mortality, I recommend this book. I also read a hyped up mystery romance book, The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year, and I didn't like that book. It's about these two rival famous authors who go to the giant mansion in England and try to solve a crime. And I hated a main male character. I think he is arrogant. I didn't like some of his comments. I also think that it is a bit lazy if the author says maybe some things are better not to be solved. What are you talking about? It is a mystery novel. I want to know how it happened. And that was the only reason I was reading this book until the end, because I wanted to know how all things happen. Don't try to give me a life lesson at the end. I just couldn't see why this book is so famous, because writing just felt okay. The main male character, I hated him. I didn't really feel the mystery being solved. This was my first time reading a very specific holiday book, and I'm not sure if I can venture into another holiday book after this. The final book I read this month was a banger. All This Could Be Different is a heartbreaking, sad, and yet very warm novel. It was very painful to flip the pages because Sneha, the protagonist, goes through a lot of hardship as an immigrant in the US, and her boss is terrible, but she still has to work in that company because she needs a visa to stay there and to support her family in India. Also, her property manager who works for her landlord is horrible and terrible. All the life factors of Sneha go so bad at some point, I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I think this book is one of the good representations of literary fiction books because it shows how all the things could accumulate and then you feel so agitated, and it doesn't really give a banger ending. It's more like that's how it is. It's more focused on showing the slices of life and the commonality, also the individual factors of each other's life. And some sentences in this book is chef's kiss. It's so good. I almost cried, especially when it gets close to the end. It's like a firework of beautifully structured sentences. And it all somehow ties back to the early and middle chapters of this book thematically. Honestly, I'm not sure if I can reread this one because it is a painful book, but rewarding. Those were the books I read in December, the last month of 2024. I hope you enjoyed this video. Catch you guys later. Bye!